Well, the recruiting momentum for Oregon football is scorching hot right now, highlighted by 2024 four-star quarterback Michael Van Buren. So what do we have in him? And 2024 four-star defensive lineman Xadavien Sims. We're talking about that today. Here we go.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. If you have not already, please like, comment, subscribe wherever you listen to or watch this show. Remember, I've got that goal of 3,000 subs on YouTube before the season starts. I think we can do it. Today's episode is brought to you by Birddogs. Go to birddogs.com/lockedoncollege, and when you enter promo code Locked On College, they'll throw in a free custom Bird Dogs Yeti style tumbler with every order. We've got Brian Smith, our Locked On recruiting insider here at the network, on the show today. We got a lot to get to, so Brian, let's just hop right in. Michael Van Buren is kind of the biggest name, I would say, that Oregon's gotten committed because he plays the biggest position, that being quarterback of sorts. But they've had a lot of guys, and we're going to talk about all the commits they've gotten in the last week or so, of which there have been 3 of the blue chip variety, which is great. But let's start with Van Buren. What do you see when you watch his film that makes you intrigued, or say something like, I think he needs to grow a little bit in this area?
Both. He has the physical traits to play quarterback, but he is unique. He's not even 6 foot tall. So my first concern with him is, like, what kind of bulk can he put on? He's 180, 190 pounds, whatever it is. Can he put on a little more bulk? Because, like, I had a college coach the other day tell me your most valuable asset is your durability and ability to play. That's not, I'm not going to quote the coach, but every coach I talk to, it's pretty much the same thing. Nobody wants to hear that, but it's about injuries. Can he put on some weight? He is a freaking athlete, though. This is a kid that you could put him in the slot somewhere and he could catch balls. So I'm not worried about him running around, but eventually they will tag you no matter who you are. So if he can gain a little weight, that would be good. Where it's undervalued with him, and just like reading comments and watching his film, he's a better passer than he's given credit for. And he's got a pretty damn good arm. Van Buren's the kind of kid that can throw deep, plant his back foot, and let fly. Do not allow his lack of height to fool one. He has the ability to do that, and he can throw on the run. So RPO game, pocket game, and he's a kid, if you want to run a naked bootleg, good luck to the guys that's trying to tackle him in space one-on-one. This is a really good athlete. I just think it'll take time, like most kids. College playbooks are not friendly to college freshman quarterbacks. So it's just, that's never going to change. Think of a New York City phone book for some of these schools, but it just is what it is. The sooner he gets into that, the better he'll be. And he's also at St. Francis, one of the best prep programs in the country. That is so important for a quarterback because he's going to be challenged more on a daily basis. So when the Ducks get him, he'll be a little bit more of a finished product than most prep players.
There are going to be a lot of quarterbacks on Oregon's roster come spring 2024. Right now, it looks like you'll have Ty Thompson, you'll have Austin Novosad, you'll have Luke Moga, you'll have Michael Van Buren. And that's, the depth is not of concern there in terms of having guys who are capable of starting. But do you see Van Buren as being able to push for that starting job in 2024, or is he most definitely a little bit like Luke Moga, a developmental guy who's going to need a year or two to kind of, get up to speed, understand the system, and adapt to the college game?
I will always go with talent in general, but I saw Novostad, and I know him well from Elite 11 finals last year, and I went and saw him playing a game last year, just outside of Austin, Texas, too. He's going to have an advantage with the playbook, and I'm just using him as an example. Any guy that's got an advantage with the playbook, even when they're not more talented, coaches won't admit this publicly, but 99% of the time, they're going to go with the guy that they're comfortable with running their system. So I would imagine, even if he is ready, and I don't know what Oregon's quarterback coaches and all they're going to think once he gets there. That's all conjecture. But it's going to be hard for Van Buren or Moga to make an impact when another guy already knows all the idiosyncrasies of how practice operates, the quarterback room, etc. So unless he just slays it, I would imagine he's going to redshirt. Same with Moga, but it's not out of the question either. These are two talented kids that have really, really good athleticism, and they bring something a little bit different. Like Novosek can move around, but these kids can flat out run. Like Moga can fly. So maybe there's a chance for a package. You never know.
Yeah, and I think the scheme fit is interesting, and we don't fully know what Will Stein's going to do at Oregon. There have been a number of indicators that it'll be very similar to what Kenny Dillingham did, and it doesn't require a running quarterback. But I thought some of the best plays we saw a year ago were using Bo Nix's mobility as a function of the play. The naked boots to take a deep shot down the field. Which is just a growing concept in college football. You slant the O-line one way, you leave the tight end as the ISO blocker, and you sprint out and you just, buy a bunch of time. You got to be able to throw on the run. When I see Van Buren and Moga, frankly, and think about those sorts of plays, I say I think they can make that sort of jump and execute those sorts of plays, which is really encouraging. Last thing on Van Buren before we get to a litany of other positions that Oregon's been recruiting well, because things have been going quite well for Dan Lanning and the Ducks over the last week or so. Is Van Buren a guy who you lock in and say he's definitely going to be a starter for Oregon one day, or is it more in that he's capable of doing so and the chips have to fall in the right order for it to line up for him to be Oregon's starter?
I think it's the latter, just because of what you mentioned prior. They're going to have talent there. The way it works, you said 4 guys are going to be there in the spring.
Yep.
Is it a lock that all 4 are there come August of 2024?
No, absolutely not.
That's what I say too. Whichever guy comes in 4th, is he going to be there? I have no freaking idea. That's so hard to project. And as a general rule, you start a year with 4 quarterbacks, you end with 3. That's kind of the new norm in college football. And sometimes you're lucky if you got 3. Kids do not care about the logo. They care about their place on the depth chart. It's just the way it is. So Moga could be that kid that gets beat out. Maybe it's another one. Maybe it's Novosad struggles with it. I have no idea. Whatever it is, I would expect at least one of them to be gone by at least the end of 24, if not even before the season starts next year for the Ducks.
Yeah, I think it's kind of the world we live in, and you don't know what sort of transfers Dan Lanning and company would want to bring in. And I think they're in kind of a fascinating point with the quarterbacks where they're bringing in 2 high school kids in an era where most people, the best quarterbacks in the Pac-12, by the way, the most loaded conference at the quarterback position, I think, in the country, they're almost all transfers at one point in time. Michael Penix, transfer. Bo Nix, transfer. Caleb Williams, transfer. Cam Rising, transferred from Texas once upon a time. Jaden DeLora, transfer. Shedeur Sanders, transfer. Sam Jackson, like it's all those sorts of guys. So I'm really intrigued to see how this all plays out with the high school kids and whether or not they, end up getting an opportunity to really start, or whether they're, there in case they pop and everything really starts to look good, or if they're just kind of a backup option if they don't find someone in the portal, because it's such a huge part of the college football world. But you need to have a great defensive line, and Oregon added another commit in the 2024 cycle at that particular position. We'll talk about Xadavien Sims after we talk about Birddogs, which are the perfect summer shorts. Brian's out there in Florida where it is hot and humid all the time. So you just want to go out and enjoy the summer weather. Birddogs are what you're looking for. They fit great. They're super, super comfortable, and they've got tremendous versatility. You could wear them to a summer barbecue. You could wear them out for a swim. You could wear them to the golf course. You could wear them going out on a date. Whatever, Birddog shorts are exactly what you're looking for. Go to birddogs.com/lockedoncollege. When you enter promo code lockedoncollege, they'll throw in a free custom Birddogs Yeti style tumbler with every order. That's birddogs.com/lockedoncollege. Enter the promo code lockedoncollege to get that Yeti style tumbler with every single order. Okay, Brian. So Xadavien Sims commits to Oregon. Oklahoma was in the running. There was an unfortunate instance in which some Oklahoma fans were not particularly kind to that decision. And fans can be passionate. Fans can also be very dumb. And as a reminder to all Oregon fans out there, that sort of stuff matters. And fans can be representative of a school, not indicative of what everybody is at that particular institution, how all the fans are. But it's not a great look when that sort of stuff happens. But it is a great look when Xadavien Sims chooses Oregon, because this is a big kid. I mean, when I watch some of his huddle highlights, he looks really, really big. And when you're playing out in Texas and Oklahoma, I mean, Texas a little more so, you got a lot of really good football players around you in that part of the country. And he's 6'3", 275. He looks like a kid to me, Brian, that could play early in his career by the time he gets to campus. But I think this is just kind of a Tosh Lupoi, Tony Tuioti special is what I described it as the other day. Like going into the middle of the country, getting a highly sought after recruit with other big name schools after him. I like this get for the Ducks. What do you see from him on film?
He's a kid that the fit for playing D tackle is there. You look at his frame like he's just standing there before a play. You're like, I wish I had biceps like that. I was cheated. So, I mean, I've lifted my whole life. I never had anything like that. But anyway, he's a kid that can play on the interior. He could probably play some strong side end in a 4-man line, but he's just an athlete. Like he's played tight end. He could play in the backfield, be an H-back in certain situations on the goal line. Athlete first, football player second. It's Oregon's job to figure out how to best utilize him. It's something Oregon's done forever. They've taken a lot of kids from a lot of different backgrounds and a lot of different states, and they finalized their development. This is another example of that. He's not a finished kid yet because he's moved around, but you can't teach the gifts that he's been given. I think he's best suited, kind of like you talked about, to be a defensive lineman, but he could be a big blocking tight end, I guess, if you really wanted to waste him. I would play him at 3-tech and leave him there and let him figure it out. Do I think it's going to happen overnight? Maybe not. It's not easy with the hand use and all that. But again, the skill is there, and man, could he run. So that's why he had offers from Michigan State and Oklahoma and Oregon, all over the country. He had these offers, and he's played Texas high school football this just in. The Lone Star State has some competition. Yes. So he's not going to be overwhelmed when he comes out to play for the Ducks.
So the thing that stands out with Sims as well at this point in time is that he's verbally committed to the Ducks, but he has an official visit scheduled to Michigan State later. Is that a formality, or is there real potential for him to say, I think this school is actually the right fit for me rather than Oregon?
As goofy as it might sound, both. He's 17 years old. I'm not sure he could answer that right now. If he's got the visit set, do you really think Michigan State's coaching staff, just because he committed to Oregon's, well, we give up? That's not how it works in today's world. Oregon, if it was flipped, do you think Dan Lanning would give one iota about that?
Absolutely not.
So the world we live in, especially where I'm at, it's by far on a whole nother level. Florida kids and commitment, that it's a big joke because they always take visits. I would imagine he'll take one, if not two more, to be sure. But the fact that he committed this early to Oregon is a couple of things for me. Number one, Lanning and his staff deserve credit. To get a kid out of North Texas that Oklahoma wants is not easy.
That's Oklahoma's backyard, going right into the
I mean, you're right down the street from the state border. I know exactly. It's just north of Dallas. And it's a program like that town stops when football happens. Okay, this is, one of those small Texas towns just outside the Metroplex, 40 minutes away or whatever. And it's a big deal. So he's used to it and all that. And Oklahoma football is talked about there constantly. I've been there. I know. So that's the first thing. Second thing is they're not stupid. What I just talked about with him taking visits, they have to look at things from a worst case scenario. Well, what if he does take visits? What if we have to re-recruit him? Well, welcome to recruiting with every kid. So I don't really look at it as a big deal because it's par for the course. The days of getting kids locked in where they don't take any calls or visits are over. I know fans don't want to hear that, but that's for Oregon or it could be Syracuse, it could be Auburn, it does not matter. It's just recruiting is everything. So, I mean, Kirby Smart's a hell of a coach, but do you think he'd be that great if he didn't have five guys going in the first round? No.
Nope.
It's talent.
Yep.
So recruiting is everything. Michigan State desperately needs defensive players. I'm a Midwest guy originally. Before I moved to Florida, I've always studied that program. They need defensive guys. They're not changing their plan. They're going to go after him until he signs.
So that recruitment still going to be an ongoing one. But the other commitment that Oregon got the other day was Dylan Gresham, 4-star wide receiver out of the Northern California area, right? Jacinto is
LA. It's LA.
It's LA. I don't know.
Okay, it's way it's far out as you can get before you get in the desert.
Okay, gotcha. It's a big state. Forgive me. But anyway, so he is a guy who was immensely productive a season ago, and he's just looking like a cherry on top to the last, really good week, getting the verbal commitment from Sims, landing Van Buren, and then Gresham came along and was like, wow, we're really looking like we're in a good spot from a recruiting standpoint here. So what do you see film-wise from Dylan Gresham, another 4-star wideout for the Ducks?
He's as crafty with his route running and how he makes guys miss as any kid in the country. Here's a couple of plays where he caught the ball and he would make a step and try to make the guy turn, and he would get him literally doing twirls, and then he'd go the other direction. He's smart. Second is, once he is next to you, he is beyond you. He has speed. This is the kind of kid that Chip Kelly would have recruited back in the day when he was at Oregon. He can fly jet sweeps, screens, a slant. If you are not in your proper position as a DB or a linebacker, it's over. So I think it's hilarious that he wasn't ranked more or talked about more. And I know LA and the outskirts are a little harder to kind of get to, but this kid can really play. He could go to Alabama and play. I think that's the easiest way to look at it. I follow rankings to a certain degree, especially the top 50 or so kids. Those kids are usually pretty obvious. This kid's not quite to that level because he needs to be a little bigger to be considered that, in my opinion. But he can fly. He has great hands, and he's very, very intelligent with how he runs routes and makes guys miss.
If you get speed, you can generally play at the next level in some capacity. They say, I don't know if they're right. They say speed kills. I don't know if they're right. I don't know. I'm just a podcast host. What do I know? Anyway, so let's check in on a couple of recruitments, Brian, that are ongoing for the Ducks. David Stone, Brandon Baker, a couple of 5-star guys, and David Stone, 5-star defensive lineman. Baker, the 5-star offensive tackle. Stone is from the state of Texas, correct? And Oklahoma, right? Same part of the country. Hey, it's all the same. It's panhandle, I guess all it all counts the same. And Baker from the Southern California area. Let's start with Stone. What's the latest you've heard on his recruitment, and is Oregon still, in a decent spot there?
Oregon is one of a handful of schools. When we were there this past Wednesday, communicating with all the recruits, and I interviewed David, and he openly admitted that he's got a bit of a conundrum. He's got Oklahoma set up for the middle weekend in June for his official visit. That's the 16th. But he said for whatever reason, like every other school, there's 1 or 2 weekends they all want him to come. And of course, mathematically, you can only be one place at a time. Oregon is one of those schools, like Oregon and Michigan State and a couple others are overlapping. And then there's Florida and Miami are overlapping and some others. He felt like overwhelmed. It was pretty funny because David's a pretty blunt kid, but he doesn't want to tick off anybody either. And it's like, somebody's going to have to give here. Somebody's going to have to pick another weekend. Oregon could be that school. I don't know. I expect him to take a visit. I just don't know when. And neither does David. So the Ducks are in the play. But the most important thing, and I brought this back up because we'd come out to see him in March. IMG, where he plays in Bradenton, has like basically an NFL style pro day that everybody comes up to in films and interviews. And he had told me then that if it was all possible, he would like to make a decision before the season started for IMG. And I'm like, okay, cool. So I brought that back up, and he's like, yeah, that was the plan. But I could tell it's like he has so many good relationships with coaches that I don't necessarily see that happening. Like he would really like us not to bother him anymore. And so would I, to be quite frank with you. I have to ask him because he's a national top 10 kid, in my opinion.
Right.
But he just doesn't know where the hell he's going. So he needs to take his trips, and these schools need to figure out some weekends they can all agree on so he can take them and go from there. But if it dragged out into the fall, that would not surprise me. So still kind of a holding pattern for him, but Oregon is definitely involved.
Well, being involved is, I think, all you can really ask for at this point in time before visits and more conversations and recruitment and all that sort of stuff. But definitely a big name for Oregon to follow, because those are the sorts of players, if you want to build championship defense, you got to have a foundational piece like
he's
him.
Special, man.
Yeah.
He's as good as it gets.
Yeah. And he is someone that if Oregon were to land, that would raise the expectation level
100%.
significantly. And I'm just thinking about the possibility of a defensive line that has Mateo Uyunglele and David Stone on it. Those are big time players. And I'm excited about what Mateo could do this season for the Ducks. But the other 5-star Oregon going after is Brandon Baker on the offensive line from Mater Dei. And Oregon has long looked like they've been in a good position here. And every time I check in on his recruitment, I see Oregon getting mentioned. I see Oregon in the mix. What are you hearing, Brian?
I hear that is going to be all over the map. So
Really?
USC and everybody else is after him too. I would say that, I mean, there are only so many guys that can play tackle and move backwards to take on guys much smaller than them. Think about how hard it is to pass protect against some of these edge rushers, or even somebody like Stone. He's one of the rare guys that can play on the edge and take on a 220 guy or take on a guy like Stone that's 290 and a bull. So I would say Oregon will be in it to the end. I just wouldn't be like, oh, I'm going to usually make early decisions almost always. I would not guarantee that's going to be the case with him because, like Stone, it's overwhelming. Every school in the country wants this kid.
Yeah.
He might be the best offensive lineman in the country. You could at least make that argument. He's in the top 100 by all the different rankings and stuff like that. I'm curious to see when the Ducks bring him in and if they can get an unofficial visit, maybe in the fall too, because I think even if he commits, let's just say he commits in July for the sake of argument, I bet it'll still be one of those deals again. You're talking about a kid that could be one of the top 50 players in the country. Is anybody going to stop recruiting him? No. So, but the Ducks need help on the offensive line. And to your point a moment ago, if you win in the trenches, like they had a certain young man that got drafted by the Lions a couple of years ago, that changed their offense. You know what I mean? It's just the difference between winning and losing because my guy's better than you at some point. When you're playing USC, when you're playing Washington, you know he's going to score. You got to be able to, grind out some drives. That's the kind of kid that can do it. So I'm curious not only when he visits Oregon, but does he take another trip? Because I don't think his recruitment will be done this summer. I really don't.
Yeah, and Penei Sewell's impact, I think, was most felt in 2018, actually. He got hurt. Oregon got off to a good start. We had the unfortunate instance against Stanford, but then we upset Washington at Autzen Stadium, and it was a huge, huge moment. But then when Penei Sewell got hurt, the offense just completely and utterly stumbled because they wanted to run the ball so much, and they couldn't do it behind their stud, true freshman offensive tackle in Penei Sewell and those guys. So you're saying like Baker is that sort of player where he'd come in
athletically. Yeah, he could start in the Pac-12. Absolutely.
He could start in the Pac-12 right now before his senior year of high school.
I think he could for some of the lower level schools. Yeah. Another year of development. Why couldn't he compete at Oregon? I mean, this is a kid, again, if you just go and look at his offer list, you're talking about 40 plus offers.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Big time guy there.
And he's at Mater Dei, which he's been coached.
Right.
He has been coached.
Yeah. No, that's a football power down there. I've had people ask me before on the show, like, hey, how many kids are we going to get out of Mater Dei High School? And I'm like, well, it depends on how many recruits they're going to put out. But the answer is usually, several at the Division I level. I think you probably get more or as many Division I prospects coming out of Mater Dei as you do in like the entire state of Oregon, at least at the Power 5 level. Not a bad school to be involved with there.
Oregon's done very well there.
Yes, indeed they have. So last thing for you today, Brian, this is a mailbag question that came in. And remember, everybody, you can always be part of the mailbag, which is absolutely stocked right now. But by all means, we got plenty of time until September. So keep sending the questions in via YouTube comments or on Twitter at Smalls_55. Or at Locked On Ducks, DMs and mentions wide open. This one from Mallard Copter, which is just a name I appreciate, first of all. Hey, Spencer, had an idea for a question next time you have a recruiting expert on the show. What goes into the exact recruit rating? Generally, I understand the concept of the star rating, but I can't find an easy explanation of how a player grades a 0.91371 over a 0.91372. What equation is used? Thank you, Brian. The floor is yours.
That is a great question. I've been in some of those meetings with like rankings and stuff. Like when it first came out, when Rivals started doing it, 6.1 as high as you can get. How in the hell did they come up with 6.1? And that seems so odd to me. And I have friends that work for, never asked. I don't want to know is my honest answer.
Yeah.
But it's just a combination of where we rank each category and it leads up to the 6.1 thing is just kind of goofy, but everybody has their own little idiosyncrasy, and sometimes they're public, sometimes they're not. ESPN, like Luganville and those guys, they don't put out as much information about that, how they do it. They have their own recruiting service they sell to the colleges and stuff. I don't really know if it's all that important. I think the bigger metric to worry about is whether or not a kid is ranked like top 100 or so. Because once you're to that, like if you're in the top 100 in the nation by any service, you're a football player. that could come in and make an impact for somebody. Don't get to, 97.38 over 97.65. Let it be. Don't delve into that too much. I've been in some of those meetings, but it's not worth your time.
Right. But one thing I want to ask on that is on the specific variation, when you're getting down to that level, I understand like that doesn't matter as much. But like a 4-star who's an 89 point something versus a 4-star who's a 95 point something, is that a computer generated metric?
Well, it's numbers they put in and then the computer does it. Yeah, like this is
Okay.
what we think his speed is. This is what we think. And part of that can be like position analysis. If two kids are equal in talent, but one's an offensive guard and is a quarterback, which one do you think is going to get ranked higher?
Quarterback.
You got to use some common sense. It's like forest for the trees. So, I mean, like Dante Moore is going to UCLA. Total dude. I thought he was the best player in the country last year. If he was equal with some offensive lineman, they're going to give it to Moore because he has more of an impact on the game. And they should. So there's a couple of little idiosyncrasies you got to think about.
Gotcha. Brian Smith, our Locked On recruiting guru here at the Locked On Podcast Network. Brian, great stuff today. Thank you as always.
Appreciate it, sir.
I appreciate everyone listening. See you next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, go Ducks.